You're listening to the Project Ignite podcast,
where real digital entrepreneurs reveal their very best tips, tools, and strategies to help you ignite and grow your online business.
ProjectIgnite.com. Your digital business starts here.
Now, here's your host, Derek Gale.
Welcome to another episode of the Project Ignite podcast, where we skip the hype, skip the BS, and bring you real actionable tips and strategies to help you grow your digital business and income. This is your host, Derek Gale, and today we're going to be diving into a topic that a lot of new digital entrepreneurs struggle with, and frankly, just a lot of people these days due to COVID and the way it's changed how we work. The fact is, digital entrepreneurs, many people become digital entrepreneurs because we don't want to have to go to an office every day. We want to work for ourselves, work wherever we want to be. And now we've had a huge influx of people that have jobs, work for people, but also are now working remotely. And so how do you stay productive? And that's a question I get all the time. Like if you go into my Facebook groups and stuff of new digital entrepreneurs who are, really just getting into this, and all of a sudden they've gone from an environment where, they have accountability all around them in the form of bosses, coworkers, stuff like that. And they don't have all the distractions of home. How do you stay productive and get the most done? And so when I came across this gentleman, today's guest, I knew he would be a good fit for this show because he's the author of the book Slacking Off, A Successful Way to Work from Home. And he's been a work from home entrepreneur now for over 15 years, so well pre-COVID, and has worked for major corporations like Cox Automotive, Verizon Superpages, and different major commercial finance companies, but he's done it from home. But again, like most of us, his journey wasn't always smooth sailing. And the reason why is because he's a human being, as we all are. But he's figured it out. And today he's here to share some of the wisdom of his strategies and that he's included in his book, and hopefully makes us all a little more productive. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mike Arnold to the show. Mike, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Derek. Appreciate it being here. And thanks for that amazing intro. That was awesome. You might have to do it for me in the future. That was great. I was like, wow.
It's always easy to have somebody else introduce you. It's always hard to say. I always have problem. People are like, what do you do? I'm like, I run and stuff. It's so easier to get somebody else to introduce you. Okay, so what inspired you to write the book? Just out of curiosity.
It's not necessarily the most sunny of days that made me write the book. I actually did some reflection on my past working in corporations for some of the most intelligent people I've ever seen in my lifetime, who were also entrepreneurs and employees, and always constantly striving to be the best they could be. I found that for workaholics, they're oftentimes, struggling with balance within themselves. And I basically just said, okay, well, what can I do to help somebody working from home, whether they're just starting to get into this, like, I don't know how to balance my life, or they're already in it and they're like struggling, dealing with how to just work out or eat properly, or just not get caught up in this huge trap of like, I'm a productive beast, but everything else is suffering. And it's kind of crazy. I just wrote the book, A, for myself, so I could have a roadmap for myself of what I've done that was successful, and B, so that people don't get in the dwindling spiral of misery working from home.
Sure. And it's funny. A lot of people have this perception that, when people work from home, they don't work as hard, and maybe they're, and in fact, I think the opposite is true, because there's no boundary. There's no cutoff between work and home. And it's so easy for work to trickle over, particularly if you're an entrepreneur and you kind of eat what you kill. And I assume that's what you experienced.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've always been in roles in the past that were not necessarily like an hourly wage role, or it's always driven on production. And anyone who's been working from home for a long period of time knows that customer or employee is actually getting more than you get from a 9-to-5 employee, right? Anybody, and you always know, because if you actually are being driven by compensation, or just doing a great job, or trying to do a great podcast, you're going way over and beyond what you normally would.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the big deal. That's the piece that I think employers nowadays are capitalizing on. They're capitalizing on the fact that employee works from home. They know they're going to put in 10 hours because you give them just the right deadline that makes them do it without you saying that they need to do it, and they're going to do it.
And it's true. And beyond that, I've had offices, I've had staff, and in fact, just before COVID hit, I'd like to say it was, good planning, but it was a little bit of luck. A company I'd taken over about 3 years ago, I have about 50 staff there. And I hadn't downside, like I put everybody remote, and we had literally just got rid of the lease on the office and had totally downsized to just a meeting space. And that was just luck that COVID hit at that point. So I didn't have to deal with that.
Wow.
But it's been an interesting journey over the last year and a half watching, because I've been remote now for 15 years since I sold a company back in 2009, where I had an office. Wow. I had 2 offices. I had 100 staff, and I was like, screw it. I'm never doing that again. It was horrible. Right. And I've worked remote since then. But a lot of people in the company that when I did this, year and a half ago, how is this going to work? Is this going to work? And I would argue now that productivity has gone up, because when people are working, there's so much distraction that happens in an office.
Right. Yeah. You get caught up, or you're just, you focus on not working. And it's interesting though, because like at home, it's actually possible to get more done. We know that. Mm-hmm. But it's also possible to actually be happy. And honestly, like that was the biggest struggle I noticed for running employees, being an employee, having my own business, having other entrepreneurs that I was helping. That was really it. It was just about happiness. It's about really truly being happy. It's like, you overboard yourself for the day and feel great, but there's always something missing. And so I was just doing my best to balance myself. And honestly, I made every mistake and mistakes I didn't put in the book that you could imagine, and literally pushed it to the extreme of those mistakes and made it out. And the only way I wrote this book was based on the mistakes, and it was supposed to be different than everybody trying to say, hey, here's a perfect example of how to do this. Mm-hmm. It was like, hey, here's how to do this. This is the sequential steps from 1 to whatever of how to do this right. And here's the example of how I did this wrong. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the book, I flip it. All right, well, I still show how to do it right, but then I show how I did it right at the end, instead of like most books where they're like, hey, this is the perfect way to do this and use this as your gold standard. I want every single reader to use their own example in their own life as the gold standard, not me. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So
that's a big deal. Anyway.
So give me some examples then of, some of the mistakes you made and how you've turned that around.
Well, I mean, let's just go to like the most fundamental mistake, right? It's slacking off, right? Like, how many times do any of your people now, or even yourself, work from home and they're on Facebook or Instagram for a split second, 5 minutes. They're in a meeting, they're looking at a different email, they're looking at something else, right? They're not paying attention. Yep. And there's a reason for that. And it has nothing to do with actually looking at whatever it is they're doing. There's an imbalance. See, if you can't put your attention on something fully, then I've come to find out that it's just one of those fundamentals of human beings, that there's something holding their attention back. And so just that alone will increase somebody's success, happiness, productivity. And so that's one thing that you don't really pay attention to. Not many people do, right? You're on a meeting, you're like, oh yeah. Why? It's because, I already know this, right? Blah, 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 blah. No, it's actually usually something else. I can't speak for every person, but ultimately that's actually how I began the book. Was I basically confronted the things that I did to slack off, made sure that I associated and had time to do so before my workday or after, and just scheduled time for myself. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what it all comes down to. Like, how many entrepreneurs overspend their time on their family, whatever it is. Of course, spending time with family is great. I have one, I know what it is. I have many companies, many businesses I work with. Mm-hmm. But ultimately recognizing what is it for you. Is it working out? Is it, reading a book? Is it going on social media, whatever? And just having a roadmap for yourself to make sure that you have your own set schedule or your own time first before you set time for your entrepreneurship or whatever that may be. And I think that for me, one of the biggest mistakes I ever made was, years had gone by where I was missing lunches, missing breakfasts, not taking time for myself, working out whenever I could, being inconsistent with my nutrition, being inconsistent with my workout, being inconsistent with spending time with my family members, or being inconsistent with friends, and totally 100% all in, dedicated to work. And work only gave me so much, while I definitely got paid. Let's look at Elon Musk, right? 50 hours a week or 100 hours a week, whatever he can do, right? That was great, but I really don't believe anything should ever feel like work. It should never feel like you're having to sit there and go through it. If you're having to do those things, you're not happy. Like, let's just be real with each other. It's 2021 where crazy things have happened. I think the least we can do is be happy with what we're doing. And it's kind of ironic, right? When you're happy, you have unlimited energy.
So, okay, now just to challenge you on that, there's inevitably stuff in everybody's job that is not going to make us happy, though, right? Like, it's just the crap that we're like, I got to do it, but I don't want to do it.
I mean, I guess there's definitely, I think that's not necessarily the task, as is the purpose. See, the purpose for doing what you're doing outweighs the minimal or menial tasks that you have to do, and outweighs the excruciation. See, I think ultimately that's actually another part of the book that I talk about. Like, listen, every day you wake up and every day you go to work, you should have your intention of what you want to achieve in mind. If you don't, then you're wasting your time. I don't care how good you are. I don't care if you're Michael Jordan. It doesn't matter. Listen, I've talked to the Michael Jordans. I've talked to the guys and spoken to them and given them advice when they're having struggles because they're not in the zone. They're not doing what they need to do. At the end of the day, you constantly need to raise the bar. You constantly need to focus, and get better. So that's really, at the end of the day, like, your purpose should increase if you're finding yourself struggling doing your admin, which I hate. I don't like admin. I hate scheduling. I hate writing. I hate writing invoices. I hate, doing all that data. Like, it's not for me. And honestly, that's when, as an entrepreneur, you ask the question to yourself of whether or not you need to hire somebody to do those things. If you truly don't enjoy it, and you can actually then afford to have somebody else do it for you, sometimes it's worth paying for it. I mean, what does money really bring except for time to do other things? Right?
Yeah. So I mean, what you're saying there is yes, as you said, there's stuff that we all have to do, beat it min. It's not our favorite thing, but the overarching purpose of why you're doing it is what motivates you to do it.
Right. And that's what changes whether or not it's excruciating or painful, right? Is that it's like anything. You go to the gym, you push yourself, and sometimes it's super uncomfortable. I don't know about you, but I work out till I can't, every set is going until I can't go anymore. It doesn't look so great when the dumbbells drop to the floor or the barbell falls, or you know what I mean? But I get the most gains by doing that, right?
Yeah. Okay. So what does your day look like then? How do you structure that? Like, what's your perfect day?
So the perfect day for me, obviously, I schedule out my eating. I schedule out my workouts. I schedule out my time. Right now I have meetings put on my calendar. So I put a gap of time where I have, schedulers schedule meetings for me. And then I have my own other things that I add to the calendar, but I use my digital calendar like it's my Bible. I don't necessarily always follow it, right? Like, I definitely don't always work out at 9 o'clock every morning. And I definitely don't always eat breakfast at 8 o'clock every morning. But the point is that I have my important things about what makes me me, right? I'm the steel behind the frame of the building, right? So that's really ultimately the way the day is scheduled out, is just having times that you've designated that others can see are blocked off, and that you can see are blocked off, so you can hold yourself accountable. I had a friend earlier today talk about his goals, and it was amazing, because it's true. Like, you spend all this time on everything else, but you won't give yourself 15 minutes every single morning to write up what your goals are every day.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I'm totally in agreement. And I don't do that all the time. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's these things that definitely make it.
Yeah. It reminds me of the old saying, and I'm a big proponent of this, it's that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Right. And you do, I think that's an important message for anybody who's trying to make that whole remote thing work. With you have to hold yourself accountable, but you got to give yourself something to hold you accountable to. And that's the scheduling, that's the planning, that's the mapping out. And so you're not giving people here's the perfect framework. You're helping them. This is what I'm hearing. You're helping them discover what their framework is.
Exactly. 100%. And here's the deal. Clean out all the BS first.
Yeah.
By finding out what you do that is considered slacking off, so you can understand what makes you happy outside of work, right? Even if it's work, it's work. And then hold yourself accountable. Don't let your boss hold you accountable. Don't let your wife hold you accountable. Hold yourself accountable. And then start working on personal things to schedule. And then you can work on prioritizing your business schedule. Because I think mostly, as I was one of those guys shot from the hip. You know, I was like, okay, I'll figure it out within 9 to 5, right? And I was okay. You know, I still hit my numbers. I still did the things I still made money.
Yeah.
Right? I was still successful. I just wasn't happy.
Yeah.
So it's really about like, hey, this is how I did it wrong. This is how I've done it right. But in the example of this exercise, it's exercise based. And then at the end of it, you're going to have your own thing, 100%. You have your own framework, 100%. And that truly is what I want. I think ultimately, in the beginning of it all, and I'm being very general, we were meant to be very self-determined, and a lot of us aren't anymore. And I don't want that to be the case any longer. I want people to have their own gold standard. I don't want them to use mine or
Sure.
his or hers.
Yeah. And I think, we live in a society now where we don't teach kids to control their own fate and destiny, right? Like we teach kids to go to school, get an education, get a job, and be told what to do every day, every waking moment. But that's not how historically we were prior to, I guess, the Industrial Revolution. And honestly, I think we live in this time where there's almost a toxic hustle mentality culture that that I'm not a big fan of. And look, I'm an entrepreneur. I've worked my ass off. I've built numerous businesses, but I also believe in working smart as opposed to hard, right? It's not about who puts in the most hours, but we have this mentality from the Gary Vaynerchuks of the world and stuff like that. And he's done some amazing stuff, but you got to hustle. If you're not hustling hard, or if you're not working, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, somebody else is, and you're going to lose. And I don't particularly believe that, but I think it's creating an unhealthy culture. So that said, one question that I get a lot from people that I'd pose to you is we say, okay, you got to hold yourself accountable, right? And people have been raised, and we raise our own children this way. We send them to school. Somebody holds them accountable every day for going to school, getting grades. There's always somebody holding you accountable, right? And then all of a sudden, you're at home either as an entrepreneur doing your own thing, or you've been sent home to work, and if you're still working from home, there's some accountability in terms of deadlines and stuff like that. But how do you coach people to hold themselves accountable when there's nobody else doing it?
That's actually an incredible question, and a line that, again, it's impressive actually. Like going back to Gary Vee, it's all about what you understand to be the defining line of hustle culture, right? Like hustle culture of somebody who is doing something that's totally miserable and just working themselves to the bone where they can't do anything and they are just miserable. That's a whole other thing. But like, look at Gary Vee. He goes to garage sales and buys video games, retro video games, and he made that a business, right? That's fun, right? Like, so like but I think it's all an education process. Ultimately, I'll hold this up against anyone or anything. Ultimately, when you sit down with yourself at the end of the day and you are 100% alone, you come into this world alone and you die alone, technically, right? It's very unlikely. You could die with someone else, but without being too, down tone, I'll just say at the end of the day, you may think, or someone may believe that other people are holding them accountable, but I'm going to 100% call BS. At the end of the day, you're the one that makes you feel guilty. You're the one that makes you feel happy. No one else does that for you. So at the end of the day, if you're allowing somebody to make you feel guilty, you're still producing that guilt. And you're still causing yourself to be affected by it based on your level of appreciation and respect for that person making you feel guilty. The fallacy is that we are taught to love and appreciate our parents and our teachers and all these things by society, when some parents are horrible and some teachers are too, and some are great. Mm-hmm. But the ultimate underlining, always respect them, even though they beat the hell out of me or treat me like crap. I think that's not workable, right? That's illogical. And so at the end of the day, you are your own person. And I guess if you're confident enough to hold yourself accountable, then you're great. You can. But if you're not confident enough, which is what we need to do, right? We need to build confidence and self-determinism within our children and our society so that everyone can make their own decisions and actually do what they need to do so that we can have a better place to be, right? Look at us right now. Do you think that any of this has to do with self-determinism? Almost none of it. You know what I mean? Like, this is all very like, I don't know what to do, so I'll do this, right? A lot of this is. And so at the end of the day, there's no, red pen to go right through everything to make someone be accountable and hold themselves accountable. Yeah. It's just a matter of this. I think that someone believing that they're not holding themselves accountable is 100% a fallacy, and that they're just basically lying to themselves, believing that there's other people your kids are going to get upset with you, your wife's going to get angry, your husband's going to get angry, blah 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 blah. But if those people weren't here today, you'd still make yourself feel guilty if you didn't go to the gym or didn't eat properly, when all of a sudden you're at the doctor and they say this is because you didn't eat properly or go to the gym. The doctor's not holding you accountable. He's just expressing the result of your actions. So I think it's just a matter of, we can't be totally carefree, but we also can't try to lie to ourselves and be like, oh, it's his fault. He's the one that made me accountable, or she's the one who told me. It's my mom's fault, that she's the reason. It's true. They're great reminders, and parents are great. I do it to my own kids. But I think, the more you clear up your own ethics, right, you realize what you consider right and wrong. You consider right and wrong, and you have a good mindset. And I think you're good. Ethics is a personal thing. It's a personal thing. Got that from a book on it from L. Ron Hubbard. And that's just like, that's huge. Ethics is personal. And that's really, I think, ultimately what it comes down to, right? Personal ethics.
Yeah. I struggle with the accountability one, though, simply because it's one I've struggled with so many people who've said to me, I want to do this. I'm working from home. I'm having trouble, they're procrastinating, whatever. They say all the right things, right? I want to do this. Right. I want to do this. They say all the right things, but they say, I need somebody to hold me accountable. And I don't have an answer to that, right? Because I don't know. I mean, honestly, I will tell you this. At the end of the day, I can't imagine that those people are happy. I can't imagine it. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine that somebody's happy, somebody else holding them accountable. I mean, to an extent, like it may be a certain amount of happiness. Like it could be a playful, like, listen, I tell my friends all the time, I say, hey, listen, remind me of what you just said to me about the goals thing every now and again. Like I say it like that, that's a little bit of accountability, but ultimately the only person that's really going to care is me. So like, if I'm not happy, then I'm not doing the things that make me happy. That's it at the end of the day. And if you need somebody else to hold you accountable to do your job, right? Then you probably shouldn't be working. Yeah, you shouldn't be working from home. And I think that's an important one here, right? Like I have so many people like, oh, I just need somebody to hold me accountable. Like, well, then you're probably doing the wrong thing. You're not in the right place.
But I know 9-year-olds that hold themselves accountable right now.
Sure. But look, accountability for different things has different levels of discomfort, right?
Absolutely. Totally.
And that's where, let's look at weight loss. If it was easy, the large majority of the population of these countries wouldn't be, obese, right?
Right. Right.
But people human nature is wired in so many ways to avoid discomfort. And unfortunately, to achieve goals, you need to be willing to be uncomfortable at times.
That's true. That's true. And you know what? That you are touching on a huge topic. I mean, that's bigger than Earth. Like that is a huge topic right there, because everything tied into misery has to do with avoiding reality, right? Avoiding what's actually happening right in front of your face. And when you don't and listen, I'm not saying this like it's this easy where you just say, oh, you know what? I'm going to be accountable today. It's really not that easy, but it is a muscle and you have to work it. And I think ultimately that is something where we all can get better, but we need to work it just like a muscle. I work with doctors right now. I speak to doctors all over the country in different specialties. I have so many different viewpoints of different things. And I got to tell you, the mentality of working things like a muscle, mentally, physically, it's very similar in a lot of ways. Of course, the mind is different. I don't believe the mind and the brain are the same. I think the mind, the brain, very different.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately it's a muscle of working yourself in uncomfortability. And honestly, ultimately, it's an education problem. It's an actual education problem. It's how am I going to be educated on what is right for me and what is wrong for me, right? How do you educate somebody on what's right and wrong for them? How do you do that? That's almost impossible, right? Because it's all subjective. But if you can get somebody to a place where they ultimately know for themselves, if you can just get somebody to confront what's right and wrong for them in any way for themselves, and you can get them to lay it out, like what is truly right and wrong for me without my mom and dad telling me, or my grandparents or my church or anything, what's right and wrong for me that I agree with and disagree with, then I think they know. And I think there's an old Scottish saying about know thyself or something like that. I'm sure you've heard of it somewhere. And that's, I think, ultimately what we need to teach each other and help each other with is just knowing who we really are as people before we go out there and be like, oh, I need to hold myself accountable. Well, what kind of person are you? What do you actually agree with or disagree with? And are you doing it because your brother did it or your friend did it or your mom did it or your dad did it? Or are you doing it because that's how you really feel? Right? Like that's the biggest, what do you call it? Dark curtain ever. And so anyway, long story short, back to the weight thing and holding people accountable. It's like the reason people have weight problems is because they're uneducated. It's not actually because they want to be fat. It's because they don't think that they're becoming that way, and they don't think it's a problem until it's a problem, and then they just are a matter of them actually listening, right, to what people are saying, but they're really just avoiding pain, right, or they're avoiding something.
Discomfort.
Discomfort. Exactly. Purely. So anyway, I mean, obviously not the end all be all, but definitely I think a step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting topic because I see so many people that have all these aspirations and goals and things they want to achieve in life, but that's all they ever remain is goals and aspirations because they never actually take the actions to achieve what it is, because the minute it gets difficult, the minute there's friction, they grind to a halt and take the path of least resistance, right? And I mean, you can boil that back to, people working remotely and, same thing. I get up in the morning, I could do this, or I could turn on Netflix, right? And well, Netflix is easier, and that's a path they take. And getting, it's interesting sort of where you're going there. I think people, if you want to be successful as an entrepreneur in particular, or remote to that point, you have to develop a certain level of self-awareness. That's
right.
That I don't think, and all of us to an extent have blinders on, but some people way more than others, as to what their strengths and weaknesses are and why they're making the mistakes. And that's what I'm hearing from you is that sort of, the process of understanding why you're not achieving what you want to achieve. And
You're good. You're good. That's precisely it. I think ultimately that's what matters, right? You got to use yourself like a tool,
Yeah.
because you do have strengths and weaknesses. And that's actually, it's ironic. You're the first person to ever bring it up the way you did. I actually started to write the book as a strengths and weaknesses process that I use for businesses.
Okay.
And, I drive up efficiency in a business quick. I mean, it doesn't matter how good it's very rare I go into a corporation or a business or see somebody doing something that I can't actually enhance in some way or make them faster and more accurate. I mean, it happens but it's rare. And so that's actually the ultimate part, is that this is a series of identifying your strengths and weaknesses, the things that make you happy and the things that don't, and then realigning your life so that you don't fall into that trap of like pure misery and you're doing drugs or you're doing something that makes you unable to function in the future for your family and for yourself. Because I think this is heaven or it's hell, right? You're either happy or you're sad. It's all about the perspective. It's all about how much accountability and responsibility you're willing to take about your life and the things around you and the people around you, right? Like, we're not controlling everything, but we're controlling enough to change our lives and make ourselves happy. And we're not babies, we're not children, right? We're definitely accountable, right?
And
no matter what.
Yeah. And in first world countries where we have opportunity, sure. I mean, there's some people that just been dealt shitty hands, just where they're born and what they've been given. But for the most part, and the people listening to this podcast, chances are you have the opportunity and the ability to make changes in your life. But again, human nature gets in the way. And this is me venting my frustration after coaching thousands of people over the years as entrepreneurs. Is people like to blame and deflect and blame, and it's and it is that willingness to go, okay, what can I do to make things better? It doesn't matter about everything else because I can't control that. Here's what I can control. How do I improve this? And make those hard decisions. And they are hard decisions.
Yeah. I think ultimately, it really depends on where you're at. I wanted to mention something just based on what you said about like some of these guys, this hustle culture, because it's actually really important to understand. I think for your listeners, it'd be a great way to view this. And I've run into this myself, and I'm sure you do too. I have no doubt, maybe not as much, but it's all about understanding what you prioritize as important and not allowing one thing to take over another. At the end of the day, like, hustle culture, I think, should be about not allowing the hangout with your friends to stop you from being productive in your business or your family. And there should be a prioritized list in your life that makes you understand ultimately, just naturally, what is a priority over another thing. And what surprises me? Some of the smartest people in the world don't have that priority list at all.
For sure.
They just deal with it, whatever comes in. There's not always a worse thing, but I think ultimately at the end of this book, that's one thing I put in there that I think was the best thing I ever created, was the ability to prioritize what's important throughout your day and what's not, based on what comes at you, not just based on what you need to do. And I think once people confront that, if they can just do that exercise and get uncomfortable for a minute and truly say to themselves, that meeting with my manager right at this time of day doesn't actually matter. If it's possible, of course.
Yeah.
Or that meeting with this client doesn't actually need to be there. I actually need to be doing this. And this is more important. I never even thought of that. Right. And sometimes I think that alone will help people. I think that's probably the biggest impact that I've ever made in somebody's life from a work from home entrepreneur is just that part, which is the end of this. And it kind of leads up to it. And that's really it. I think knowing what should take your attention and what shouldn't, and knowing that to the core of yourself, that's it. Just know the list, check the list every now and again, make it for yourself. And then of course, forget about it, but at least you have it, you wrote it, you're not likely to forget. You know what I mean? Yeah.
And so give me your schedule during the week for planning. Do you every morning, beginning of the week?
So I typically do, a couple weeks ahead or sometimes a month ahead of general like business, personal things, depending on vacations, things like that. I use multiple calendars. Digital calendars are like my best friend. I've had so much more time after that. I really try to not go a day without adding something. Like if I'm talking to you and you're like, hey, we're going to have coffee or we're going to have a meeting, I put it on my calendar right there and then. I don't wait for you to send it to me. I don't do that. I handle it right there and then. That's another piece too. It's like very important. You're in the middle of something. Somebody's asking you to commit to a time. You look at your calendar. You put it on the calendar. You don't just write it down. Mm-hmm. I think writing it down is just adding more time to your life, and it's so ridiculous. But most people don't do it that way, right? They'll write down that they need to write something down. Mm-hmm. And so I think ultimately, forecasting out what you want to do in your time is important. I mean, you're creating it, right? You're making your time. Yeah. Make no mistake, right? So, and I could always be better. I'm not perfect at it at all by any means, but
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think that's something for everybody to realize here. And this goes with, whether we're talking to Mike or any of the, the productivity, and I talk about productivity all the time, right? I have people asking me about all the time, right? I've run multiple companies. I have a podcast. I do all this stuff. I travel, I've got a family. How do you do all that stuff? And I share my productivity tips and how I do my days and planning and stuff like that. And we're probably not all that far apart in how we do those things. And, right. The thing people need to realize though, is I'm not perfect at it, right? I screw it up. Sometimes life gets in the way and I'll go 3 days without doing it. And then I'll feel overwhelmed. I'm like, oh God. And I was like, oh shit, I've got to stop, refocus, reorganize and go. And everybody needs to give themselves permission to drop the ball occasionally, because we're all going to, and that's human, right? But it's not a case of dropping it and then going, fuck it, I'm done, I'm never doing it again. Pick up the ball again and get back on. Yeah,
right. And like I said to you in the beginning, I love shooting from the hip. I love it. I love spontaneously going to dinner or doing whatever I need to do. I enjoy that. That's actually, the biggest part. I was the biggest resistor to all of this in the beginning, the biggest resistor.
Yeah.
And because I was still successful shooting from the hip with my time.
Yeah.
I just wasn't as happy. And so ultimately, you're right. Giving yourself permission, don't be afraid to fail. Don't look for failure, but don't be afraid to fail. Any sort of reaction you have to failure or to a conversation or to the things you're doing that isn't pleasurable or enjoyable or at least bored is probably something you need to work through and do, of course, assuming that it's giving you a positive result in the end, until it is. Do that, right? Make yourself uncomfortable, put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Don't throw yourself off a building with a parachute yet, but maybe, grab the rope, tie it to the other rope in the building and rope down that thing first. You know what I mean? Like there's a gradient to everything, but I think you're right. Ultimately giving yourself permission to fail and not dwelling on it and move forward. I think I just listened to something Joe Rogan said or something about and I think ultimately we have to tell ourselves that a lot, right? We have to say don't beat yourself up, and the people saying it are the ones doing it. And the people, and we do it all the time, but ultimately moving forward is the most important thing. My mom died in 2016. She left me with this quote about, things happening. I'm not going to quote it because I don't recall exactly, but ultimately it was, sail we must, no matter what happens in life, you must move forward. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that, it's almost like you're going to wake up tomorrow if you're going to wake up tomorrow. So you better own it. You have every second of every day, every millisecond. I think sometimes in milliseconds because I'm a little ridiculous, but I certainly understand that those are owned 100% by me, no matter what.
Sure.
I don't care if I'm in a third world country or not. I still own that time. Mm-hmm. Even if someone's making me do something, I can figure it out, right? But I own that time. A little less so, of course, in third world countries if people are being forced to do certain things. But sure. You get the point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, look, I mean, I always say to people, time is a finite resource, right? You choose how you use it. And, we're not on this planet forever.
Yeah, that's right.
So
That's right. Exactly.
got to make the best of it. Well, look, I've really enjoyed this conversation and where it's gone.
Yeah, likewise.
And you know, I like these deep topics because it's interesting because it's something that I've mulled over and dealt with for many years, working with different entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. Yeah, so no, it was a really good conversation. But that said, before we wrap up, if people want to know more about you, check out your book, where do they go?
So Amazon is where the book is for sale. If you just go to Slacking Off, book, it'll pop up. I think pretty sure it's the only one. I obviously have social media, Instagram, Facebook for the book. Personally, it's not necessarily public because obviously I work with medical, a lot of doctors and things like that as well. So it's or LinkedIn, but I think ultimately, there's not too much hidden. You could really just find out much on the book. I go into using examples of my life, so you pretty much find out a lot about me in the beginning and the intro. But yeah, it was great, and I definitely appreciate the topic. And going into the deep, challenging questions, that was very cool too. It's good for me.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. And for our listeners, go check out the book. If you're struggling, trying to figure out how to get your shit together, how to make something happen. If you're not getting the results you want, you're struggling, each day you get up, you're like, what do I do? You're not making the progress you want. Yeah, check this book out and it could have the answers you're looking for. And again, all the links mentioned, link to the book and stuff will be included in the show notes on projectignite.com. And before we wrap this up, I just have one more ask for all of our listeners. If you like what you heard, please leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to this podcast. And on that note, this episode's a wrap, and we'll see you guys again real soon.
Thanks for listening to another info-packed episode of the Project Ignite podcast with Derek Gale.
Any links mentioned, along with an entire transcript of this episode, can be found at projectignite.com/podcast.
And to make sure you never miss another episode, go to iTunes or SoundCloud now and subscribe.